Hey everyone, it's Tom here with Bunny Media. I hope you're all having a fantastic day today. So you're planning to start an e-commerce business and you're wondering, should you sell on Shopify or BigCommerce? Now both platforms are massive players in e-commerce, but while both platforms are awesome, they're both very, very different from one another. So it's important to know these differences so you can make the right choice for your business. So in this video, we're covering the main features of both Shopify and BigCommerce, the pros and cons of each platform, and how to ultimately choose what's right for your online business. Specifically, we're covering how much control store owners have, pricing, integration and apps, and the blogging capabilities of these two e-commerce platforms. Let's dive in. All right, so the first factor we're going to look at between Shopify and BigCommerce is how much control store owners have. And when it comes to picking the right e-commerce platform, control is actually a very important thing to consider because you want to make sure that the platform you're on has enough flexibility to do what you want it to do. It's also important to think about how much design control you have, because the last thing you want to do is start your online business and then find out 3 or 6 months down the line, you're kind of boxed in and you have to switch to a new platform. So that said, the good news is that both Shopify and BigCommerce are pretty good when it comes to giving store owners more control over the look and feel of their stores. So with Shopify, you can choose from hundreds of free or paid themes, do your own custom coding or even hire developers to make a custom Shopify store for you. And what's nice is that even beginner Shopify stores give you control. So you can edit how your store looks, edit your shopping cart, add things like coupon codes and all of that stuff. So it does leave you with a lot of control out of the box. BigCommerce is also very similar, and between the range of free themes you have and the premium themes, you can pretty much make your online store look how you want it to look and make sure everything matches your brand. Now, it's honestly a little hard to pick a winner between BigCommerce versus Shopify here in terms of control because both platforms are very beginner friendly and quite flexible. Now, I will say that I prefer Shopify's free themes a little bit to BigCommerce's free themes, and Shopify just has more themes overall, so it gets a slight edge there, but overall this really isn't that much of a differentiating factor. And you can definitely find mobile, robust, very visually appealing themes with both BigCommerce and Shopify. All right, so the second factor we're gonna look at in the Shopify versus BigCommerce debate is pricing. And out of the gate, it might look like Shopify and BigCommerce have pretty much identical pricing, but it's actually an area where these two platforms differ quite substantially. So with Shopify, you're going to have to pay for monthly plans to launch your own store, and this starts at $29 per month, and this is honestly what a lot of beginner e-commerce stores or anyone testing out Shopify is going to want to go with. And this $29 plan is actually quite robust and unlocks most of what Shopify has to offer. You can add your own domain name, you get an SSL certificate, you can tweak your theme, kind of edit your shopping cart a little bit, create coupon codes, and do all of that fun stuff. You can also accept multiple currencies and different payment methods. So for $29 a month, Shopify definitely lets you get a complete store up and running. Now, in terms of payment processing fees, this is where Shopify starts to get a little bit expensive for some store owners. So you basically have to opt into Shopify payments unless you want to get annihilated by fees. And this usually means you're paying about 1 to 2% in payment processing fees. Fees can even get as high as 2.9% plus a 30-cent transaction fee. So overall, Shopify definitely has some kind of steep transaction fees you need to think about. Some Shopify plans get discounts on transaction fees, but again, beginner store owners expect to spend between 1 and 3% every time you make a sale in fees. Now, in terms of BigCommerce, pricing is actually one area where we think BigCommerce is superior to Shopify. So BigCommerce pretty much has identical monthly plans to Shopify, and again, you're going to be spending about $29 per month as a beginner store owner, but BigCommerce doesn't charge you with these additional payment processing fees. In fact, BigCommerce actually lets you use over 50 different payment processing partners, so you can choose the payment processing method you like, add that to your store, and you're off to the races. Now, these payment processors can and will still charge fees, and BigCommerce does charge fees for things like credit cards that you might accept or debit cards, so fees are still a part of the platform, but it is definitely going to be lower than Shopify in most cases. Now, one slight downside of BigCommerce here in its monthly plans is that it caps how much revenue you can make per year. So once you make more than $50,000 per year, you have to upgrade from that beginner plan. But again, for a lot of beginner store owners or e-commerce operations, this probably isn't that big of a deal. So BigCommerce also has a lot more functionality out of the box than Shopify, so you're going to be spending less in third-party apps, which we'll cover later in this video. But the bottom line is BigCommerce better on fees, you're not spending as much on apps, and overall it should be more affordable than Shopify. All right, so I just mentioned integrations and third-party apps. So the third factor we're gonna look at in the Shopify versus BigCommerce debate is how many integrations and apps are available and if they're actually useful. So one of the advantages of using Shopify over other e-commerce platforms is just how robust and in-depth its app store is. I mean, if you've seen our video on Etsy versus Shopify, you know how good Shopify is and how it kind of blows the competition out of the water when it comes to these third-party integrations. So the Shopify App Store has literally thousands and thousands of apps you can download to help serve different functions for your online store. And this includes apps for categories like store design, marketing, sourcing and selling products, upselling, memberships, and customer service. In a nutshell, if there's some specific function or service you need to add to your website, there's a really good chance you can find a Shopify app that lets you do exactly that. But the one massive downside of the Shopify App Store is that a lot of these apps don't just charge you one time, they actually charge you on a recurring monthly basis. And so what this inevitably means is that as you add more apps to your store to improve different aspects and functionalities, you're spending more and more every single month, and that bill never gets smaller. Once again, this is kind of why BigCommerce stores tend to be a little bit cheaper. You get more functionality out of the box, so you probably need fewer apps, and so you're paying less per month in fees. So I used to work with Shopify stores when I worked in paid media and ad buying, and honestly, a lot of the stores had like 3, 4, 5, 6, or even more paid apps running per month. So you're at least looking at $100 to $200 a lot of the time, or even more in these added costs, especially as your store scales. Now, this is still handy because if you encounter a stumbling block with your Shopify store and you just need a third-party app to solve it, and you're not very techy and you don't want to solve the problem yourself, the App Store is again very useful, but just know a lot of the time it is pay to play. On top of that, Shopify's App Store is pretty much the largest out there, and it's larger than BigCommerce's. Typically, developers start with Shopify, they make apps there, and if the app does well, they'll port it over to platforms like WordPress or BigCommerce. So BigCommerce has improved here in recent years, but the bottom line is if you want the most apps possible and you really rely on third-party software to get the job done, Shopify is better than BigCommerce, but just know it might get more expensive. All right, and the fourth and final factor we're looking at in this BigCommerce versus Shopify debate is blogging functionality. So obviously, as a full-time blogger, I love blogging. I think it's great, and I also think it's great for e-commerce store owners who are looking to diversify their traffic and get more sales. After all, even though paid traffic and social media traffic and email marketing traffic is great and can be very lucrative, organic traffic is some of the highest converting traffic out there, and it can also be completely free when you know how to blog and you blog correctly. Now, historically, blogging has just been horrendous on Shopify and BigCommerce and e-commerce platforms in general, and this is still slightly true. I mean, in reality, let's be fair, WordPress is the best CMS for blogging and nothing really comes close to it, but it's still important to consider what kind of blogging functionalities you get with an e-commerce platform if you're going down that route. But because WordPress is the best, really the question becomes, can you use WordPress with Shopify or BigCommerce and integrate your WordPress blog into your e-commerce store? And the answer is honestly pretty disappointing for Shopify. Shopify does have a WordPress integration, but it basically just lets you add some buy buttons to your WordPress site and integrate some basic e-commerce functionality into your WordPress blog. On top of that, in Shopify fashion, this plugin costs $9 per month. Now, alternatively, you can blog on Shopify with its blogging platform or blog through a subdomain, but again, this really isn't as powerful as WordPress, and blogging with a subdomain kind of leads to some issues like, you have to rank that subdomain, and domain authority doesn't really spread over to that subdomain. Now, BigCommerce is similar to Shopify, and it actually has a WordPress integration as well. But for starters, you don't have to pay $9 per month for this integration, and it also gives you way more flexibility and control over how you blog. For example, BigCommerce lets you add multiple sites to one single control panel. So if you're blogging from multiple areas, but you want to kind of connect it to a central e-commerce hub, you can do just that. Overall, it feels a lot more like an intertwining of the two platforms rather than just slapping some e-commerce buttons on your WordPress blog. And again, BigCommerce is just a lot more easy to use when it comes to blogging than Shopify is. So overall, when it comes to blogging, the winner has to be BigCommerce over Shopify. We still love WordPress, we think it's great, but if you're sticking with an e-commerce platform and you really think blogging is going to be an important part of your marketing mix, definitely go with BigCommerce. All right, so now that those factors are out of the way, let's cover the pros and cons of Shopify and BigCommerce and then get into what's right for your business. So starting out with the Shopify pros, the first really has to be that there are just a ton of different free and paid themes you can use, and you get a lot of flexibility out of the gate. So really with Shopify, you can make your store look however you want to. You don't need to have any design experience, and you can also hire designers to help you out if you need that helping hand. Shopify also has way more integrations and third-party apps than pretty much any other e-commerce platform. So if you need to solve a specific service or problem you're running into with your e-commerce store, there's probably an app out there for it. And the third pro of Shopify is just that it is so beginner friendly. I know people who have launched Shopify stores with no e-commerce experience. I did as well back in college when I tried drop shipping, and very simple, very beginner friendly, and there are so many tutorials out there, so you really won't get stuck on problems for too long. All right, well, what about the cons of Shopify? Well, really the first one has to be pricing. I mean, Shopify is a little bit pricey in terms of payment processing fees, and it also gets more expensive as you add those third-party apps, like we mentioned. And the second major con of Shopify is it's just not great for blogging. I mean, it's not better than BigCommerce, and it's definitely not better than WordPress. So if blogging is very, very important for your business, don't go with Shopify. All right, well, what about BigCommerce? Well, the first pro really has to be that you get a lot of control and flexibility right out of the gate, so you're not gonna be spending that much on third-party apps to unlock more features. The fact that BigCommerce also lets you integrate with so many different payment processors and doesn't charge transaction fees is another massive perk for this e-commerce platform. And the third pro of BigCommerce is that its blogging integration with WordPress is actually pretty good. So if you have a few blogs you're running, or you want to actually use your blog as a channel for your e-commerce store, BigCommerce's integration is actually quite good. Now, in terms of BigCommerce cons, the first one is that you have fewer apps and third-party integrations than you do with platforms like Shopify. Again, this is getting better as the years go on, but developers make apps for Shopify first and then they port them over later. So keep that in mind. Another small con of BigCommerce we had to mention was that you have slightly fewer themes. And I think the free themes on Shopify are a little bit better. So, you probably have to pay for a BigCommerce premium theme if you really want to get the most out of your store. All right, so now we have the pros and cons out of the way and you know all of the main features of these two platforms. Let's cover quickly how you actually choose if Shopify or BigCommerce is the right solution for your online business. So we think you should use Shopify if you want to keep things as simple as possible, you want as many third-party apps and integrations as possible, and you also want to try dropshipping at some point. There's a lot of platforms out there where you can dropship, but Shopify is kind of the leader in this space. There are so many dropshippers who use Shopify. I know a bunch as well, and I've worked with some before, and even tried launching my own store back in college, and the process was very, very seamless and very simple. So great for dropshippers, still great for regular e-commerce businesses, especially if you value simplicity. All right, now in terms of who should use BigCommerce, we think BigCommerce is great if you want to pay less in transaction fees, you want to pay less in third-party app fees, and you also want to use your blog to drive traffic to your e-commerce store. Both platforms are incredibly scalable, but we think BigCommerce has advantages in terms of pricing and blogging, where Shopify is more beginner-friendly and has some better themes and is pretty much the most simple e-commerce platform out there. And remember, you can always take both platforms for a spin to see which one you like more. I mean, you can use Shopify's free trial or spend $29 one month, get your store up and running, and just see how you like the look and feel of it. You can do the same thing on BigCommerce and then make your decision when you're more informed about both platforms. At the end of the day, both platforms are incredibly possible, both are very scalable, so you can find success with your e-commerce business if you sell on Shopify or BigCommerce. Anyways, guys, I hope the Shopify versus BigCommerce breakdown helps you decide on the right e-commerce platform for your business. If you're currently selling online or you're thinking about selling online this year and you're debating between Shopify or BigCommerce, let us know down in the comments which one you're picking and why. That's all for this one, guys. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you all have a fantastic week. This has been Tom Blake with Bunny Media, and we'll catch you guys in the next one.